The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's PsychCentral.com live webinar series. We have a great presentation for you today, but before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. We cannot see or hear you, so the only way that you can interact with the presenter is by typing in your questions in the question box or the chat box, and those will be moderated by me, Gabe Howard, at the end of the presentation. You can enter your questions at any time, and it will not upset the presenter's flow. If you need to use the restroom, get a snack, or do anything like that, we cannot tell, so feel free to hop up. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our presenter. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone.
You all. I'm thrilled to be joining you all, and thanks for tuning into this webinar. I'm very excited. It's one of my favorite topics, and I hope you find something useful for yourself that you can use to improve your life. So again, my name is Agnes Vishnevkin, and I'm co-founder and vice president of Intentional Insights. This is a nonprofit educational organization where you can learn more at intentionalinsights.org. And the goal of Intentional Insights is to help people reach their goals, improve their lives, and improve their communities using strategies based on the latest research in psychology and cognitive science. And so I was very excited when Gabe Howard gave me the opportunity to present to you all as part of Psych Central's webinar series. And so why did I choose this topic of how to manage your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors? So let's see if I can get there we go, it's working. Magic. Okay, so this is kind of one of the pictures that you often see that symbolizes, happiness and wonderful things. What do we want in our lives, kind of? And if you have a pen and paper, or just think to yourself, kind of, what would be your perfect life? What do you want out of life? Some people say that they want to be happy, they want to be successful. Some people want to be at peace. Some people want to be, to have less stress, anxiety, or sadness in their lives. And perhaps here in Psych Central, that's something we're all especially aware of, is our emotional well-being and how we can have more of it. And while this presentation is not medical advice or therapy advice, of course, these strategies that I'm going to discuss later in the findings, they apply to all of us. You don't have to have a diagnosable mental illness of any kind to look for less stress, less anxiety in your life, to look for less sadness. You don't have to have depression to have too much sadness. I personally have an anxiety disorder, and if I did some of these things early in my life, I probably would not have gotten to some of the crisis moments of the past few years that I had. So if we think of what we want out of life, let's think, what can we actually do about it? Is it actually under our control? What's under our control as we're moving towards our goals, to reach our goals of whatever they may be? Happiness, health, friendship, acceptance, love, lack of stress, lack of worry. So what's under control? I say that what's our control is our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. They're all inside of us. What's not under our control? Everything else. I thought it might be overkill to put that in big letters, but let's just be honest, that's the truth. Nothing else is really truly under our control. We can't control the weather, we can't control other people, we can't control technology most of the time, So let's just focus on what we can control. Let's focus on what we can do. And so, again, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all within us. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at three portions. This webinar is going to have three portions. The first, we'll look at two systems of thinking that have been uncovered in some recent cognitive science research. And then we're going to talk about thinking errors that we're all prone to, and how these thinking errors can get in the way of us reaching these goals and getting what we want out of life. And finally, we'll talk about some science-based strategies to use our knowledge of the two systems of thinking to overcome these thinking errors and to have a better chance at reaching the goals that we want to achieve and to having the kind of life that we want to have. All right, so two systems of thinking. So here's a beautiful graphic that one of our volunteers at Intentional Insights put together back when we were getting started. The Intentional Insights launched in the fall of 2014. And this topic is so important to what we do, bringing this research out to folks everywhere and breaking it down so it's easy to understand and follow. That this graphic was for one of the very first blogs that we wrote. And so what does this mean? So if you look on the left, it's who we think we are. It's easy for us to think that we're just logical, you know, it's just puzzle pieces working together, or little cogs are turning inside our brain. We're fully aware of what's happening. However, according to some recent research, we're actually better represented by the picture on the right. A big, beautiful, fun and exciting elephant with a little person riding it on top. And what we often come to feel that we are, you know, this logical person, all of that is represented in the little rider. So this little rider over here. So what is all this elephant? This rider is so small, so the elephant is so big, and the elephant represents our emotions. You might call it our subconscious mind, although that's not completely accurate due to some recent findings, because we can be in touch and identify our feelings, identify them as they arise, and we can change them to some extent. So it's very helpful to think of riding an elephant. And just think of like what would happen. I have not been fortunate enough to ride an elephant, although, you know, I totally want to do that since I've been thinking about the rider and the elephant for years now. But imagine riding an elephant. You want to go right, but the elephant wants to go left. What are your chances that you're actually going to go right if the elephant doesn't want to? Like, they're not very high because the elephant is so huge, so strong and so powerful, and you're on top of it. So if we take this view that our emotions are like a very large and powerful elephant that we are riding, that can put into perspective just why it's often difficult to get control of our emotions and to influence our emotions. However, since we are riding the elephant, what happens? Elephants that are being ridden, they're domesticated animals, and over time they're trained. So we can change the course of the elephant. We can change our feelings very carefully and with a lot of work. So now that you're thinking about this image, we're going to go to a little more specifics. So here, the two systems of thinking. So on the left, the elephant, and on the right, that rider. In psychology and behavioral science literature, they're often called System 1 or autopilot. And System 2 is what I like to call the intentional system or the rider. And so we can see that the elephant is subconscious, automatic, and habits. So this is subconscious thought. Habits that we often don't think about is, you know, a lot of habits, for example, if you drive a lot of times, we don't think like, you know, which pedal should we press, or that we should look over our shoulder for another car. Subconscious, you know, if you are accidentally touch something that's hot, you immediately withdraw your hand. It's automatic and very quick. These are some examples. Now, if we look by contrast at the rider, at the intentional system, it's conscious. It's the logical. You know, right now I'm using my System 2, my rider, to talk to you. However, I am, you know, having my hand on my mouse to move, you know, the cursor, that's kind of automatic, you know, I do it all the time. But I don't give presentations multiple times a day. So I'm now mindful. I have to be mindful so I don't speak too fast, because that's something I thought about before calling in. It uses our attention. So here are some differences between the elephant and the rider. In addition, here are some more differences. So the autopilot, the elephant system, is very, very fast. The rider is slow. So for example, if you are, crossing the street and suddenly there's a speeding car, you run. You don't think, you don't stop, because the autopilot, it's your emotions. It triggers your emotions of fear, of danger, and you immediately get out of the way. You think about it later. It's intuitive and it's emotional. That's where our emotions come from. So one reason and kind of behind these behind these systems, and something that I find very helpful to think about, is that these two systems evolved. They were part of our evolution as human beings. And so the autopilot system, as you can see, it being fast, intuitive, and emotional, and also on our previous screen being automatic and habitual, this is a part of keeping us safe. So if you think of where humans lived millions of years ago, we lived in the savannah. We lived in small groups, relatively small groups of between 100 and 150 people. And so that was kind of progress over, previous communities, and previously, before humans evolved, there was not this community setting. And you can see it in animal kingdom everywhere, that animals, they keep safe. If they see some kind of danger, I see a bird on a bird feeder through my window, and if the bird catches me moving even a slight bit, bird is gone. The bird doesn't need to stop and think. It doesn't need to be smart. It can have the autopilot brain, its elephant brain, to stay safe. That's all the bird really needs. And that's what humans and our predecessors, the great apes, that's all that was necessary. And that's how you survive. It's for your survival. Now the rider and the intentional, the reasoning system, the logical system, mindful and attention, learning, that it also occurs there. That is something that humans developed as we started living in groups. That's where it became important to communicate. That's where it became important to learn to work together and to collaborate. So humans evolved this more advanced portion of our mind relatively recently. And you may have heard references to some people say, oh, it's your lizard brain. So in some way, the elephant portion of your mind is like the lizard brain. It's what keeps you safe. It's deep inside, and the emotions all come from that portion. Now, when is the rider activated? How can we tell what portion of our mind is engaged? When the elephant runs into difficulty. So for example, if I'm jogging, and maybe, I jog every day and it's very normal. I don't have to think about where I put my feet. And then I feel like my ankle is strained. And then I start thinking about it more consciously, and I bring attention to my ankle, and I'm thinking, oh, what happened? Do I need to turn back? Do I need to slow down? Or do I need to stretch or something? So something that was automatic, habitual, and mainly subconscious, the process, the act of running, is now, I have to pay attention to it. So when else is the rider, our logical mind, activated? When we're learning new information. So for all you folks, as you're listening to this presentation, if you're paying attention, your rider is activated. So for example, if you're learning how to drive, so a little earlier we talked about driving. If you imagine what it's like first to learn how to drive, and for me personally, I learned how to bike. I guess I relearned how to ride a bicycle about 2 years ago, ripe old age of 36. So I rode a bicycle, I was maybe 8. And so I was trying to figure out how to ride it again around my neighborhood. I got a nice big bike, and it wasn't easy. I'm just going to tell you, I Googled how to ride a bike, and everybody was laughing at me, but it worked. And the first time I looked over my shoulder to make sure I can turn without getting hit by a car, I lost my balance. So it was kind of tough to learn how to stay upright on a bike. Now I don't think twice. I can use one hand to adjust my scarf. I look over my shoulder. I can do all sorts of stuff. And so learning new information, first the rider was activated, the logical, attentive portion of my mind. But as I learned it, it's now much more automated, and it's mostly handled now by system 1, by the autopilot system, by the elephant. So when we learn new information, if we practice it a lot, it often becomes autopilot. Finally, the writer, our logical mind, becomes activated when there's awareness of the potential for error. So when we think something might go wrong, when it's an unusual situation, when we feel risk or danger in our decisions, a lot of times the writer also gets activated. So now that we talked about the elephant and the writer, if you are curious to learn more about this topic, because we're going to move forward to talking about some of the thinking errors, I just want to mention that you can check out a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman actually won a Nobel Prize for economics based on his research in psychology of consumers, and he later went on to publish this book based on his research. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow, and thinking fast it refers to system 1, the autopilot elephant thinking, and thinking slow is the system 2, intentional writer thinking. So thinking fast and slow. And if you are not feeling like reading a very thick book, then I invite you, of course, to check out intentionalinsights.org. The goal of our organization, it's an all-nonprofit organization that I helped start in 2014, just a little shameless plug. It's to help people learn about all this information and find strategies to apply to their lives, kind of in easy to digest articles, videos, and if you prefer to just read everything in the book, a couple of months ago we published a book that summarizes a lot of the content we've created over the last few years, and it's called The Truth Seeker's Handbook. You can buy it on Amazon in Kindle or paperback. So now moving on, we learned about the two systems of thinking, and now we're going to learn about thinking errors. Now, you can see this is a picture of some toys that I actually bought at Michael's around New Year's, because, you know, I just think about it so much and think about the elephant and the rider. So I just decided, to go see if I can buy an elephant and a little rider like me. I like purple to scale. And I'm just going to tell you, it is much harder than I thought it would be to find an elephant and a little person to scale. So that was a tough one, but I'm glad I did. So I'm thinking of doing maybe some live videos on Facebook for Intentional Insights, or putting something on YouTube, demonstrating. If you could see my face, I would totally be showing off these little guys right now. So anyway, what are thinking errors and what happens with thinking errors? So like I said before, as humans were evolving, we were living in an environment that was very different from where we're living today. We lived in communities of 100 to 150 people, and there were bad fights between tribes. It was a dangerous place to be. And so over tens of thousands of years, millions of years, we evolved this logical, reasoning portion of our mind, the rider, or the intentional system. Now, today, this is the minds that we have, but today it's 2018. We don't live in the savannah anymore, but our brains are still built for that environment. And so to the extent that in our today's lives, in our daily lives, for you and for me, we come across situations that would be similar to what early humans would have encountered back in that period of time, to the extent we encounter those situations, our minds serve us very well. Again, if you're driving and there's some kind of an unfortunate situation, a rock falls into the highway, you will swerve very quickly. Your elephant mind will do it. You won't stop and think, you're going to try to get out of harm's way automatically. And that is good. That is very good. However, as we all know, there are so many situations today that are completely different and that were, unimaginable 100 years ago, not to speak of a million years ago. Constantly interacting with many people all around the world on social media, watching TV and not reading the news and knowing what's happening, having this overload of information. having very busy lives, living in communities where we don't necessarily live with, 100 of our neighbors and we know all of them. So to the, and as well as, of course, in our jobs, making decisions based on situations of uncertainty. And I can go on and on. The list goes on. We only have 45 minutes, I'm told. So basically, anytime you run into a situation that would not have existed for these early humans, we are very likely to make a thinking error. We are likely to perceive what's going on incorrectly because our mind was not built for today. And do you need to stop and think twice about everything you're doing? No. Research shows that on average, our minds work just fine about 80% of the time. So 20% of the time is the approximate portion of our days, of our lives, when we do run into these situations that we're exposed to these thinking errors. And you might have heard something called a logical fallacy or a bias or a cognitive distortion. My therapist talks a lot about cognitive distortions, but it's all the same as a thinking error or logical fallacy or a bias, a logical bias. So if we perceive something incorrectly, we're not going to make a good decision. And that is going to be a huge obstacle to us reaching our goals that we talked about in the beginning. And so we're not going to have the best thoughts, we're not going to have the best feelings, and we're not going to have the best behaviors or actions to take us to where we want to go. So now I'm going to give examples of 3 of these thinking errors, and there are over 100 of them that have been identified, and that's a great kind of source of learning right there on its own. But right now we're just going to go over 3 and look at some examples of how they might affect our lives negatively and how we can take steps to reduce their effect and to, overcome these errors and still achieve our goals. So the first thinking error we're going to talk about is the planning fallacy, otherwise known as wishful thinking. So planning fallacies occurs when we automatically assume that everything will go perfectly, and we don't allow any extra resources for unforeseen events or developments. And now, what are some examples of planning fallacy? Very many. Late to work. Have you ever been late to work? Have you ever been late to work even though you go there every single day? I know I'm really big on being late, unfortunately, and these strategies that we're going to discuss have helped me be less late. But, it's happened, being late on projects for school, being late for projects for work, overrunning costs of, maybe you're doing some home improvements and then it's taking you twice as long and twice as much money as you thought. These are some examples. And we can think of many ways where this is affecting our quality of life negatively. Maybe I'm going on a date with someone new and I think that, everything will go great. But then, maybe the date doesn't really work out. My date has too much to drink, says something that's not great. I leave early and then I feel confused and stressed and things didn't really work and I have a very sad and upsetting evening. It's hard to, I might be upset, but in retrospect, it's because I didn't think of things that might go wrong. I had no reason to think of things not going according to plan. And later I was not prepared. I did not have extra resources to deal with the unforeseen event of being sad, for example, or of having to change my plans, perhaps, arranging for my ride, making sure I can go home early if my day didn't work out. So let's move on to the next thinking error we're going to look at. The next one is a sunk cost fallacy, otherwise known as throwing good money after bad. So this occurs when we're reluctant to give up something if we invested a lot into it. For example, common example is someone working on their car. And someone might own an old car and something breaks and it costs $400. And then you fix it. And then 2 months later, something else breaks. and it costs $500. And then 2 months later, something else breaks, and a part of you thinks, for another $500 or $1,000, I can just suck it up and go buy another used car. On the other hand, you think that, but I already put so much money into it, I can't just get rid of this car. And so that kind of thinking, not realizing that it's a sunk cost and you can't recoup your costs on that working on the car, car repairs anymore, no matter what you do. You can't bring back the past. But this is something that we're very vulnerable to. Sometimes this can happen in our relationships. For example, if you have a friend and things are not working out really great, maybe you have a rough spot with your friend. But it's very difficult to just think, maybe this is just not going to work out. Maybe it's time to distance. Maybe it's time to let this relationship, end or lapse or kind of move towards the back burner. It's very hard to do if we invested, if we've shared, good times and bad times with our friends. Very hard to do that. Also, it hurts, it doesn't help that our society says, you owe your friends. Your friend was there through thick and thin. How can you just, stop returning your friends' phone calls or not visit over the holidays or something like that? And sometimes even with our families and our relatives. Sometimes this can happen with a job. If you're in a job that is not where stressful things are happening, it's very hard to, give up and go into another job, try to look for another job. Or, it's so stressful to look for something new. And we already worked so hard at it, maybe it will get better. Maybe it will get better. And, my example that I personally experienced back in the day when I was a teenager, when I was commuting to, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Lots of public transportation, as many of you know. And so when I was in high school, when I was in college, I commuted I lived with my parents. And so it was usually at least an hour commute to where I was going. So I'm running late to class, I'm waiting for the bus. The bus is not on schedule. I'm waiting for the bus some more. At what point do I just say, just stop waiting for the bus, catch a cab to get to the train station? Because if I keep waiting for the bus to get to the train station, it's just only going to get later. At what point do I give up waiting 5, 10, 15 minutes longer and just, forget it? I'm just going to spend a little extra cash and just move on with my day. That's something I personally experienced. So that's the sunk cost fallacy. And again, we're going to go over another one, and then we're going to look at some strategies for how to overcome them. The third thinking error we'll talk about is the hyperbolic discounting. And so that's the little kind of saying I found, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. But basically, it's a tendency for us to have a preference for smaller payoffs now over larger payoffs later. It's all focused on the short term versus the long term. So if I want to have a second slice of cake after dinner, and say, hypothetically, I'm someone who watches my weight, which, if you watch TV or media, it seems like everyone should be watching their weight. I don't agree. Up to you. Some people are fine with eating half a cake in one sitting. That's fine, no judgment. Cake is delicious, or French fries, whatever is your snack food of choice. But in my case, say, for example, I want to moderate my dessert. But I'm at a party with a second slice of cake. I can have it. No one's stopping me. And I'm like, tomorrow, maybe I'll feel sad and regretful about it. But it's so tempting to right now enjoy this delicious, scrumptious slice of chocolate cake that I'm going to do it. And there are many ways that this plays out in my life. Tomorrow I might be sad, I might be disappointed. I might, not be very kind to myself. But it's really very hard for us, intuitively, very, very hard to delay this gratification. This happens in many other areas of life as well. A lot of hyperbolic discounting, we're often vulnerable to it with our daily habits like healthy eating, regular exercise, good sleep hygiene, going to sleep on time. I am personally a night owl. It's kind of very easy for me to play another game on my smartphone, and another half hour passed, and then, the next day I didn't get enough sleep. Or if I didn't have to get up early, I slept in, my day wasn't as productive. But for some reason, it's just very hard for us. So, and actually when I say for some reason, now let's go back to these and talk about, I'm going to go back to the first one, the planning fallacy. Why does it happen? Why does it happen? Let's think about it from the point of view of the elephant and the rider, since that we just spent a lot of time on. So the assumption that everything will go perfectly, no extra resources for unforeseen events. You know, in our modern life, there's so many unpredictable things. But back, you know, millions of years ago in the savannah, things were much more predictable. They were much more dangerous. You know, people didn't have a great life expectancy, but there were a lot more things that you can plan for, and life is less complicated. And so our gut reaction, the gut reaction from our elephant, from our emotions, from our feelings, our autopilot reaction is that, yeah, if my meeting is 20-minute drive away, I just need to leave the house 20 minutes before the meeting and everything's going to be fine. However, you know, I don't think that there might be traffic. I don't think that there might be, you know, I might have a flat tire. I might forget my keys. I might have trouble finding parking. I don't think about that. So this is how it might happen in situations that we have not encountered back when our minds were evolving into what they are right now. In the sunk cost fallacy, you know, if someone says, you know, just trash this car, you already sunk, you know, $1,000 into it. You know, I don't want to lose. It just hurts so much to lose all this money. It feels like I'm just throwing out this $1,000 that I spent on the car. It's hard to think about the future, that this car might keep on breaking. Just, we're so afraid of loss. We don't want to lose. We don't want to, you know, give up what we have. We don't want to give up something we put in a lot of effort into. We don't want to give up that relationship or friendship or a job where we worked for many years. It's just really difficult emotionally. And because the elephant is where emotions are, it's very easy for our emotions and a fear of loss to overpower our rider because it's so small. And now back to hyperbolic discounting. Preference for smaller payoffs now over larger payoffs later. And what happens, this is, I would say, to me, this is fairly straightforward, more straightforward than some of the other thinking errors, in that, you know, back millions of years ago, there wasn't plenty. There wasn't chocolate cake sitting everywhere. There was no chocolate cake, period. So it was very hard for humans to survive and to have enough nutrition. So as many of you know, we're wired to indulge, you know, to eat a lot of things that are sweet or fatty. And so, you know, chocolate cake is both, come on, delicious. So back then, it was perfectly normal for someone, you know, if someone came across, you know, a fruit tree with lots of ripe, juicy fruit full of sugar, it was actually beneficial to long-term survival to eat as much fruit as you can. Because say your tribe is moving to another location, if you don't pick this fruit, someone else might pick it, it might go bad. If you don't eat it right now, it's going to spoil. There's no refrigeration. And if you might not have something nutritious to eat later. So you would be weak and you might be ill and you might die. There's no hospital. There's no doctor. There's no internet. There's no WebMD in your phone. You get the idea. So short-term kind of quick gratification was so important because without it, humans would not have survived. And that's what happens to animals. I'm going to talk, you know, I have 2 cats. You know, you might have a dog or another pet, and pets often eat as much food as you give them. Like I know my cats, they would eat as much as I gave them. You know, cat might be stuffed, but still eating because it doesn't have this logical brain. It still has this, you know, the lizard brain in an animal. Just staying safe, you know, I got to eat food while I have it. We're programmed that way as well. And so it's not intuitive for us to, you know, kind of delay our gratification, to gain comfort right now. It takes focus and effort to think about the future. So now that we discussed these 3 thinking errors, let's talk about some science-based strategies for overcoming them. And I'm going to list a few of these suggestions here. And now, in the interest of time, I don't really have time to cite a lot of this stuff and cite studies. But at the end, I'll share my email address, and I welcome you to contact me if you would like any more detailed information. Again, I'll have information about the book that you can purchase, and you can also go to intentionalinsights.org where all the articles are cited, and with plenty of links to research. And so the science-based strategies I'll share, they apply to uniformly to many. It's not like one strategy per thinking error. You can apply them to many thinking errors, biases, and above and beyond what the three that we're discussing today. So the first one is, not surprising, is notice the elephant in the rider. Notice which parts of you are kind of where's the conflict in you. For example, if you have that relationship with a friend that you are concerned about, you might have a lot of emotions of loss, of fear of rejection. We don't want to be alone. And one reason that it's scary to be alone is because, again, back in the savannah, when our minds were developing, it was dangerous to be alone, and you could die if you're alone. You had to be with a tribe to survive. And if you're expelled from your tribe, you can die within days. That was just the really difficult life that our predecessors had. We don't have that life right now, most of us. We are fortunate to not be in those situations, but our mind is very, very afraid of being alone. So that is one example of noticing the elephant and the rider. And so then thinking that the rider can overcome the fear by thinking about the future. Which brings us to the second point. Focus on your long-term goals. Focus on where you want to get. Where do you want to get from here? At the beginning, we talked about what are your goals in life? What do you want to achieve? What kind of future do you want? And so focusing on that is very unintuitive. It's very opposite to what our autopilot elephant brain does. So you can turn on your logical rider portion of your mind by focusing on your long-term goals. The third one, there's four. The third one is outside perspective. What outside perspective refers to is basically asking someone for advice. Ask a friend, ask a trusted relative, ask a therapist if you have a therapist. And if you have none of these, here's a trick that works very well, for me at least, and I know it works for many others. Imagine that your friend came to you with this issue and trying to make a decision. How would you advise your friend to act? It's a lot of times, so much easier to give advice to others than to ourselves. So just imagining that you're advising someone else can really give you a very valuable change in perspective. And the last strategy for overcoming thinking errors and managing ourselves and reaching our goals is to ask yourself why or why not. Why would I eat a second slice of cake? Or why would I not eat a second slice of cake? Now that would force your mind to kind of focus on both sides of the options, even though one side is heavily influenced by your emotions and by your very powerful and quick elephant. So you can engage your logical mind in your rider by asking yourself why not. All right. Now let's think about these four strategies from the perspective of the thinking errors that we discussed. Now let's think back to planning fallacy. So take a moment and think about something where in your life, maybe recently, you assumed that everything will go perfectly, but it did not, and you did not have enough time or other resources. So go ahead, take a moment to think about that situation. Feel free to write it down. Okay, and now I'm going to use a situation, and then later I encourage you to think of how you can use one or more of these strategies to avoid planning fallacy, to avoid being late, to avoid overrunning your resources. So my example was if I go on a date. Now, this is, of course, a hypothetical example. Maybe I should pick something better because I'm married. I don't date right now. But, I do try to make new friends, and I have my own struggles with feelings of isolation and loneliness. So it's kind of like a platonic date, shall we say. So, I would go meet someone new, maybe, someone I met at a community event, community group, and I say, oh, let's go get coffee. And, I hear when people date, there's some overlap. So I'm meeting a new person, and, inside, especially if I have a lot of anxiety about this, which I'm, working on, it's possible that I might have this whole picture drawn inside of my head. Everything will be perfect. I'm meeting this new person, and she's going to be fantastic. We're going to have a wonderful time. We're going to be best friends forever, right? Then I go, maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe it just doesn't click. We don't have the chemistry. So how can I prepare? First of all, I would notice the elephant in the rider. I would notice that the elephant, where my emotions are, where my intuitions are. I would notice that I have a lot of anxiety that I've had for most of my life, anxiety about social relationships, that I really, really want to make another friend, and that I will be very, very upset if I don't. And I would tune into that, and I would acknowledge that this anxiety is likely excessive. Just because I know that it is, because I have an anxiety disorder, I have social anxiety, so it's excessive. And also I would think that, the elephant might be feeling how it would have felt millions of years ago. Like, if you don't make a friend, if you're not accepted, that's the end of you. So I can tell myself that, no, it's not the end of me. If I meet with this, new potential friend and it doesn't work out, it's okay. My life can still go on, and I can make a new friend later, right? And so I can use my rider to do a reality check, because the elephant, our automatic feelings might not perceive things correctly. And I would, it just would be lying to me. It would be lying to me. Then I would focus on my long-term goals, for example, and say, like, what are my long-term goals? My long-term goals is to have, personally for me, is to have deep friendships with several people. Now, many people don't have this goal, and some people prefer to have, many acquaintances, or maybe people to go work out with, or whatever it may be. This is my personal goal. So then I would think, what's my long-term goal? My long-term goal is to have quality friendships. So if something doesn't work out, that's okay. I don't need to be super, I can be prepared for that if something doesn't work out, it's not for my long-term benefit. And so in case it doesn't, I will be prepared and perhaps be not as sad. So here are some examples how we can apply that to the planning fallacy, for example, and hopefully reduce our anxiety and sadness, and help us meet our goals in a smoother, more effective way. Now let's think about the sunk cost fallacy. What are some ways where you might have recently thrown, good money after bad, so to speak? Had difficulty giving up something that we invested a lot of effort into. So let's think my example with a relationship, with a friendship. So if I was, friends with someone, and, we've been drifting apart and having some conflict, but it's very hard for me to say, my friend, I just, maybe it's time to cut him out of my life, or to let him drift away. Very difficult. So what would I do? Let's try, for example, again, noticing the elephant in the rider. Again, we just talked about rejection and isolation being very, very strong emotional forces that can be difficult to overcome. So we'd focus on that. And then I would ask myself, why would I continue this relationship, or why would I not continue this relationship? So I would have pros and cons. Perhaps I can write them out. And trigger myself to think about a logical approach to this. And for hyperbolic discounting, actually, let's move on to our final strategy, which has its own separate page. It's the future scenario method. Let's use this for our hyperbolic discounting thinking error. And let's use this example of chocolate cake that I'm personally trying to limit. So what happens in the future scenario method is you think, what are the future scenarios that might occur? What might happen? We can't tell the future, but we can guess some potential futures. We can imagine different futures. So we would think of what might happen in the future, and we would think of how likely or unlikely are these future scenarios. And then we would especially focus on negative, undesirable outcomes. So if I'm deciding whether I should eat with my second slice of delicious, scrumptious, perfect chocolate cake, and I see we're coming up on our time, so I'll wrap up in just a couple of minutes. So think of what might happen. So I'm standing in front of this chocolate cake. So what might happen? I might, eat a second slice of cake or not eat a second slice of cake. Okay. So how likely, I guess how likely are these scenarios? So I guess it's better to think here. Let's try it again. Like what would happen after I have a slice of cake? So say after I have a slice of cake, what would happen? Right now it would feel really good. In the short term, man, this cake is going to be so good. And I know because I already had one slice, delicious. But later, tomorrow, how am I going to feel? I'm going to regret it. I'm going to wish I didn't do it. I'm going to wish I couldn't do it, which is, of course, is not an option. But how likely is it? It's very likely I'm going to be, regretting this. And that's why we focus on the undesirable outcome. So what we don't want to happen, I don't want to have regret and sadness. I want to be proud of myself. What would happen if I don't eat this cake, if I make that choice? What would happen then? Right now I would be drained. It would be, hard to exercise self-control, and I know it. So, I can maybe plan on that. Maybe I can have, a diet soda, say, or maybe I can have a small cookie instead to kind of manage myself and be like, well, I can have this little cookie, but I won't have a big slice of cake. And what will be the future, in the future? So tomorrow I will avoid feeling negative feelings. I will avoid feeling regret and sadness. And I will be able to say, I'm proud of myself. I did something that's not easy. And I'm a person who can elect to not have a second slice of cake. So if I focus on that, then maybe I can make a better decision right now. I can work against, some of the feelings that are not taking me to where my goals are. So this is the future scenario method that you can use in addition to the previous strategies. And now for a final note, the elephant and the rider, there's a lot of writing out there. Again, you can visit intentionalinsights.org, and I'll display the website in a moment. It's been so helpful in my life and so valuable for me in overcoming a mental health crisis that I had about 3.5 years ago, and overcoming my anxiety and depression, that I actually got this tattoo. It's right on the inside of my arm. I don't see it very often. So whenever I have difficult feelings, or I feel sad or lonely, or I have an anxiety attack, I used to have these several times a week. Now I have these several times a year. So I'll call that an improvement. But I would sometimes cry. I cry for like 20 minutes and I'm like weeping and bawling, like I feel terrible. At the same time, I notice in my mind like nothing bad is happening. So I look at my tattoo and I think it's just the elephant. The feelings are so big, they're overpowering me, the little person in purple. And that always helps me be kind to myself. And I just know that in my particular case, I just wait for it to end and I feel better. And of course, tattoos are completely optional, no need to do it. You can always think of your pet. Here's my cat. I know that she doesn't have system 1 and system 2. She only has system 1. And so whenever I think of, having negative feelings or making not the best decisions, I think of my cat. I try to be kind to myself and to forgive myself and know that I cannot change the past. I can change the future, and I just forgive myself like I would forgive my cat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's very exciting. All right, we're going to open it up to questions. I will just give everybody about 30 seconds to type them in, and I will pull them out and serve them up. All right, the first question we have is, in the first slide, who we are, who we think we are, you used logical as a descriptor. I keep getting confused when you refer to rider as logical rather than intentional. Maybe
Okay,
it's
great
just me.
question.
Yep.
I'll go back all the way to my slides. Let's see this here. So this is the first slide that I believe the listener is referring to. So I'm going to just skip to the second one. And so, Gabe, what was the question? So, rider.
Yep, it says in the first slide, who we are, who we think we are, you use logical as a descriptor. I keep getting confused when you refer to rider as logical rather than intentional.
Yes, I understand, and I use those interchangeably. Thank you for pointing that out. I will perhaps need to be a little more careful next time I do this presentation. I use these interchangeably, being that the rider is the intentional portion of us, the logical portion of us. So here again is this image. The rider is on top of an elephant full of rich emotions and feelings, automatic habitual actions and thoughts. A lot of them are subconscious. And so yes, logical and intentional, I would use that interchangeably.
No, thank you so much. The next question that we have is, they said that you're talking about being on autopilot. Actually, I believe it's this slide as well. When you're talking about being on autopilot, you use the example of the bird who doesn't have to think about whether or not there's danger and they just leave. Don't humans also have that in that we flinch? Do we really think about whether or not there's danger? Don't we duck out of the way anyway?
Absolutely, we do. We do have both of these systems, and we absolutely do. We flinch, we duck out of the way. That is how autopilot works. That is why in the picture right before, the elephant is so much bigger than the rider. Our autopilot system is about 90% of our whole mind, and our intentional system, our rider, is just 10% approximately. So we absolutely do. We absolutely do this. And one thing that's important to think about also, I'll just take this opportunity to make this comment, that one of them is not good or bad. We need them both to work together. Because if there's, a piece of dust, if I'm in a desert environment flying into my eye, I need to not think before I flinch my eye. It's important. However, if I'm making an important decision about my future, about whether to buy a new car, about whether to get married or to, make a new friend or to break up with a friend or romantic partner, then I need to turn on my intentional system, my slower thinking system, because it's conscious, it's mindful, it's focused, and that's where we can make decisions and make sure we avoid thinking errors.
Thank you so much. The next question says, you had mentioned about not putting good money after bad, but society seems to reward you for not giving up if it's, for example, a relationship.
That's very interesting. And so I guess I'm just not sure what, I'm just going to skip to the last slide right now so folks can get the website. I guess I'm not sure how does society reward us? So does society actually reward us, or does society tell us that we will be rewarded because it's to the advantage? Because a lot of times in society, there's certain kind of ideas that are passed down through generations that we see around us in our culture and in our media, and they're not always to our benefit. So society might tell me, your parents always come first. You should be ready to do anything for your parents, or some cultures at least. You need to move across the country, yes. Give them a giant loan, yes. And in some ways it makes sense. My parents gave me life. Who am I to not give everything I have back to my parents if they need it? On the other hand, there are occasionally cases where people have very difficult relationships with their parents, where they experience abuse from their parents, or where there are some other kinds of difficulties. It happens. And for those people, this idea that you should be able to give anything that your parents ask for, that you should value and honor your parents, for those individuals, it's harmful because it would not fit with their life. It might not fit with their goals for a healthy life to feel like they owe something to their parents, in the case, say, for example, if they have been abused, or if the relationship is harmful or hurtful. So I guess I'm just not sure I guess that's something to think about. That's very important. What does society say versus what's good for us? Society might tell us a variety of things, our culture, and in different countries, societies with different cultures, it's not always good for our goals. It's not always good for what we want to get out of life. What we want is not always what we're told we should want.
Excellent, thank you. And I believe that is the last of, oh, wait, a question just popped in. Are there any resources, worksheets that we can use to help train ourselves or others to implement the science-based strategies?
That is a wonderful question, and I'm so glad that you asked. The resource that I would love to suggest to you is intentionalinsights.org, which is the website for our organization. It's among many resources. We make sure we focus on making it accessible to folks, easy to read. 8th grade reading level is what we strive for, to make it easy. So we also have a book at the bottom of the screen. You can see the name of the book, The Truth Seeker's Handbook. It puts together all the blogs that we wrote over the past 3.5 years in a way that it's kind of like a work. It's not quite a workbook, but it has kind of questions for your consideration in every chapter to learn these practices and to learn how to apply your knowledge of the elephant and the rider in a variety of settings, including, when, there's a section there on when society tells you to do one thing, you choose another. I do have a section in there about how I handled my mental health crisis back in 2014. So it's written by Dr. Gleb Stepersky, who is my fellow co-founder of the organization. So that is something you can certainly look at. And please feel free to email me, agnes@intentionalinsights.org, if you would like me to point you to any other resources.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, it looks like that is the end of the questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for being with us, and thank you for presenting this evening. We really, really appreciate it. Do you have any final words before we disconnect?
My final words is thank you very much, Gabe, for having me. It's a pleasure to present with Psych Central. I wish everyone good luck. I hope this information was helpful. And I do regularly do these presentations. If you are a member of any group or organization that would benefit from a presentation on a similar topic or from coaching or consulting on this topic, please do drop me a line. And thanks again for your time. Have a wonderful evening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And with that, we're out. Bye, everyone.